is Dave Mann. He joins us on the program now. Dave, kia ora, good morning.
Hey, morena, Andrew.
Now, when it comes to an understanding of our history, this is, I suppose, important. We need to understand where we're from in order to figure out where we're going. But something which has got your attention recently is looking at, not just our history broadly, but specifically the history of New Zealand's values. What drew you to this, Dave?
Yeah, well, as we look at the spiritual dynamics of our nation and what people believe, the stories people hear shape their perspectives, and their perspectives, of course, then shape their prejudices.
Hmm.
And so, if we look at, I mean, we've got quite a considerable or a moderate, shall we say, anti-Christian prejudice in our nation. And
Yeah.
all of us who have Christian faith, we live with this the whole time. This is our normal. But where did that come from? So, if we look at, let's say, the bicultural story that we've just considered this past week with Waitangi Day. Many don't realize how significant Christianity was to the treaty. They don't realize that missionaries were invited by Maori because the Maori wanted them there in contrast to the behavior of whalers, sealers, and traders. The public may not realize that Maori didn't embrace the faith quickly, that missionaries even failed to really preach the gospel until Henry Williams. But then, with a considered approach, Maori embraced the Christian faith. They turned from ways of revenge and warfare, and there was cannibalism and infanticide, there was human sacrifice, there were all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And the transformation touched their hearts. They then spread the gospel the length of this country. It was remarkably good. Missionaries then gave us the treaty. It was their negotiations and their counterparts in England that actually enabled it. They are the ones who were there whenever someone signed. Chiefs didn't sign if missionaries weren't around because they were treated. And even with the treaty having been abandoned and betrayed, why did our nation decide to ratify a 140-year-old betrayed agreement in 1975 and 1985? It's only because of the remnants of Christian values that say you've got to keep your word and you've got to live honestly.
Yeah.
Because in any other country, it would have just been, sorry, Māori, you lost, and that's it. So even within that story, if the greats of faith amongst Māoridom, at Parihaka and at Waitara with Wiremu Te Rangataki, if the stories of Ruatara and Te Pahiu and Patuone and Te Rori and Katu and Te Whiwhi, if these stories can be known, you suddenly realize, well, as an academic study, as many as 90% of all Māori had embraced the Christian faith in the mid 1800s. It changes your perspective. Christianity is no longer to blame, and the anti-Christian prejudice no longer has its footing.
It is.
And what's occurred to us, it's just oh,
Yeah.
sorry, just one statement. What's occurred to us is that we're not just a bicultural nation with Maori. We're actually a largely European influenced nation. We actually have a history in Europe, and it's actually a significantly good one, despite bad that also sits there.
Some people I know struggle with this, and whilst it's true that Christianity is a part of our history, both, I mean, as you say, here in New Zealand, but also back in Europe. There are some people in our society who would love to say, oh, yes, that was just an unfortunate part of our history before we became rational and civilized. Those were some unfortunate myths that we believed back then, but they don't affect us at all. That's not a part of who we are today. But really, the values behind Christianity continue to permeate our society.
I think what we can't avoid here, we're really getting into the realm of philosophy and religion, and we can't avoid it, is that beliefs lead to behavior.
Yeah.
And so if we say that, if we just say all religions are the same, which New Zealand says, I mean, I'm laughing because my knowledge of religion says that's just so not the case.
Yeah.
And it's actually important what we believe because it leads to behavior. If I think that we're accidents of chance, a human being is an accident of chance. They're no different to an advanced animal. Let's look at what I am. You and I are talking. We have self-consciousness looking at each other on a screen while
Yeah.
being played across radio.
Yeah.
We're aware that we are here. What is self-awareness? What is consciousness? It's an incredible mystery. Inside that, we've got rational thought. There's reason to our conversation. That means we have to have free will. That doesn't exist if there's no God, by the way. If we're accidents of chance, free will doesn't exist, which undermines rationalism, moral culpability, it undermines love, and it also undermines beauty.
Mm.
Um, so how are we going to treat people if they're accidents of chance? How do we treat sick people or people with disabilities? The fact is that Christianity changed the world because of this. Genesis 1:27, human beings are created in the image of God. And that even defines our political language and perspective, because if human beings are the greatest good, created in the image of God, the role of government is to protect the well-being of people, not to rule over and subjugate them. And so at every level, beliefs lead to behavior, beliefs matter. We're one of the most free, prosperous, equality-based and charitable societies on the planet and in human history.
Yeah.
But if we don't know and value our history, the reality is we can lose it, which communism, as an example, in various European nations just less than a century ago illustrates well.
One of the things that people tend to get stuck on is, of course, we are made in the image of God, but we're still imperfect beings. And there's a lot of terrible stuff that's been done in the name of the church here in New Zealand, with, of course, some aspects of the church responsible for some terrible things that happened here in New Zealand. Also, I mean, more broadly, colonialism, and if you want to go back even further, the Crusades. Some people say, see, look, these Christians are terrible people. You wouldn't want to follow their ethical standards. But in terms of Christians behaving badly in history, some people would say, well, gosh,
Yeah.
we wouldn't want to be like them.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are Christians in history who have behaved badly. I think we could go straight to the Inquisitions, where the accusation is that millions were killed across the 600-year period. The church was having inquisitions around heresy. You could go to the Crusades, where Christians went off to kill and to convert if people, to kill people if they didn't convert to
Yeah.
Christianity. These things are, of course, wrong. The problem is that New Zealanders would have heard of the Inquisitions and the Crusades. What they wouldn't have heard about is the context of the Crusades, which was potentially even just war, except that to put religion in it was 100% wrong and always wrong.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be aware that the Inquisitions might have killed 3,000, not actually a million. But more so, the average person wouldn't be aware of the tens of thousands of positive stories happening in that same period of time. While the Christian church perpetuated evils when leaders became corrupted, the Christian church was the foundation of charity. It was the foundation of the development of the scientific age. It funded science, and it came about because of the Christian worldview. That would need a whole discussion to actually explain it.
Yeah.
It transformed economics. It managed to remove corruption from economics, which made investment safe, which led to an explosion of wealth, which transformed society. The monasteries became places of learning. They educated women and poor people, anyone who was there, charitably. The monasteries then invented and embraced technologies, believing technology to be something God would intend us to create. So let's take the workforce of the Middle Ages going from 80% of the population to 30 to create food. So 50% of the population are creating new goods and services, moving to the villages no longer being serfs on someone else's land, with new forms of money therefore being necessary, having savings, owning little properties in towns, becoming landowners, private ownership of property, a fundamental to human freedom, and a middle class comes about challenging power, completely transforming politics. At every level, Christianity was changing the world. And if we can understand the story, we can look at our history and say our ancestors, Maori and European, stuffed up in lots of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
But our ancestors actually did a hang of a lot of things that were really, really good. We have a lot to be proud of, but more than this, we're not going to preserve those values unless we actually know the story.
Now, this is something you're taking a deep dive into at the moment, and so many good stories here. This is the beginning of a book, a project that you're working on at the moment, Dave. Where are you heading with this?
It is indeed. I have actually, in my private reading, been reading on one topic quite intentionally for about 8 years, and that is the influence of Christianity upon Western and global history and culture. And this has been leading towards something. So Hope Project, some of the booklets took on topics like why do we believe in the equality of women, let's say the equality of races, end of slavery, our cultural concepts of charity, the A Minute in Hope, A Minute in History radio pieces that play on Radio Rhema and Life FM have been created on the same, but we're now working on creating a book. So it's going to be about 80,000 words, which is
Wow.
a long book. It's probably going to be about $80 to buy, but it's going to be extremely easy to read because the whole book is comprised of approximately 300 word stories.
Okay.
And the purpose is to give us the stories we just don't know. So let's just say that Our whole cultural concept of charity comes from Christianity, which it categorically does. And anyone who says different hasn't read the history. It's how do we find the history to tell them, to help them understand that? And it will simply go through actually from the 4,000 years ago, what culture was like, through to the Roman and Greek empires, what culture was like, through to Jesus, through to the Christian movement, and just story by story, showing how cultural values were shifted to the point where we'd even desire a welfare system that cares for the poor from a government. As an example, New Zealand is the second most charitable nation on the planet,
Wow.
measured by gifts, average gifts across the population measured against GDP. And if you go quickly down the first three, four, five, six, seven, eight most charitable nations on the planet, guess what you find? Christian heritage, Christian heritage, Christian heritage, Christian heritage. So yeah, so the book writing project, I hope it'll be available by next year, maybe late this year if we're kind of lucky, and work hard. But it's going to empower people with the stories to actually see our wider cultural heritage. And the hope is that this will then be gifted into the hands of politicians and local councillors, of leaders in education, and so forth. You could have a Christian, let's say, who is speaking to, I don't know, a group of educators or at a university. They can delve into the book and find the stories and tell the stories that help our nation to see afresh where these amazing values came from. Because New Zealand is an incredible country. Freedom, prosperity, equality, charity. But those things didn't come about by mistake. Let's know the story.
Now, hey, this is a fascinating project, Dave, and certainly something which I'm sure will keep you busy and occupied throughout the year. Thank you for taking the time to unpack some of that, and look forward to further conversations throughout the year. Jumping into some of these stories, certainly an exciting project to be involved with, and hey, wait with anticipation for the finished product. Dave, in the meantime, thanks so much for joining us today.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. Cheers.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.